welcome to another video from scriptingisfun.com. In this video we're going to start exploring how to bring in a 3D character, a humanoid character, and then add animations to that character and ultimately be able to control it as a player character, or even set it up as an AI character, an NPC style character. So for this, I'm going to get the models and the animations, I'm actually going to go to a website that has a lot of basic pre-built ones that we can use. And that website is called Mixmocom. So Mixmo.com is loading up. You will have to sign up for an account, or if you have one, you can log in. This is part of Adobe, so if you have an Adobe ID, that's what you can sign in with. Now that I'm signing in, it's loading up Mixmo here. And Mixmo has several different characters. If you go to the character tab, that you can pick from. So there's actually quite a few of these characters in here. They also have animations which you could target to your own characters if you design your own. Or if you design your own characters in a 3D modeling software, then you can actually upload those characters right to Mixmo, and then Mixmo will animate those characters, so it'll rig and skin them very quickly. So we're just going to find a character to play with here. Alright, so this model has a shield, he has a sword, and he's fully ready to go. Once you have the model, then you can flip over to the animations tab and you can start finding animations, and if you just click on one, such as this jumping one, it will show you what that animation looks like. Okay, so I've gone ahead and just kind of prepared a scene here with the terrain and did a little bit of work in here and positioned my camera to look on this part of the beach. I've also imported in a couple of standard assets into this project. You can get those through Assets, Import Package, and I grabbed the Environment package so I could do some sculpting and texturing of my terrain and brought the water in and such. I also brought the characters one in so that if we wanted to, we could drop a character controller in here that's already pre-built for first person and third person character controller. So you're welcome to bring those in. It's not important for what we're learning in this video though, because we just wanted somewhere for our character to live. So we have our Paladin here, and our Paladin, you're going to have one of these that has his skin. So that's this one right here, and then the rest of these are all just different animations. Alright, so I'm going to grab the one here that shows his skin, and I'm going to drag him out into the scene. So here he is. I'm just going to position him somewhere in my camera view and drop him in. And if I go down here into my scene view, you can see my character is here in his T-pose, and he's standing pretty much right on the ground. And what we need to do once we bring these characters in, we actually have to go here to the project panel, to where the file is, and we have to set a few things up. We want to go first of all to the rig and make sure we change this to a humanoid rig. All of our animations and avatars and such in here need to be humanoid, so I'm going to hit apply on that. And then if you click in on animations, you'll see the animations. Now this one doesn't have, if I hit play here, it doesn't do anything. This doesn't have an animation attached to it. This is just his skin. All the other animations came down as separate files here. So, but the rig is important. Make sure that's in humanoid. Okay, now if I want to add an animation to him, then I have to prepare one of these as well. So let's see if there's an idle animation in here somewhere. And maybe I'll slide this down to name so I can see what's going on. So I'm looking for an idle. That's a block idle, a crouching idle, a shield idle. Let's see what the shield idle looks like. So I'm going to click on that. Now same thing, all of these need to be changed from generic to humanoid. So I'm going to go into the rig on this one and select humanoid and apply. Then what I need to do is set up an animation controller, or an animator controller for our Paladin here. So I'm going to click on my Paladin in the scene, and see right here it says a spot for a controller, and there isn't one there. To create a controller, you go into your project panel and you hit create, and animator controller is right down halfway down the list. I'm going to create one of those. I'm just going to call this Paladin Animation Controller. And then I'm going to go back to my Paladin hierarchy. I'm going to grab this controller and drag and drop it into the controller slot. Now, if you have your animator window open, you can click it and it will show up here. If you don't have it open, you can go to Window and then find Animator. It's right here, and that'll open the window and you can dock it wherever you like. If you're clicking on your person, you should be looking at the animator for that. You can move around in here by holding your middle mouse button down to pan around inside here to find things. Now there will be an exit node hiding off to the side somewhere. You can just grab all these nodes and drag them around in here with your mouse. Alright, so I want to bring in that idle animation that I just set up here. So I'm going to go back down to Shield Idle. So let's see here, where was that one? I think it was this one here, the Sword and Shield Idle, yes. Alright, and then I'm going to just go ahead and drag that into my animator. And what it did is it went inside of there and it found the animation file. So let me take a look here. If I open this up, you see it's got this one right here. That is the animation. And if I was to hit play here, you can see a preview of it. Okay, so you can see there's some hands and bobbing around and such right there. Alright, so we've got that right there. We also probably want to make sure this is set to loop. So if I go back here to the main Sword and Shield Idle here, and I go to animations, you'll see there's a place here if I scroll down for a loop time. If I check that, that tells it I want it to loop. So I'm going to hit apply on that. And now it should be set as a looping animation. I can also rename the animation right here. So instead of it being Mixamo.com on all these animations, why don't we just call this Sword and Shield Idle, so that we kind of got it named the same as its actual file here, so I won't get confused later on if I add a lot of these. And again, after that you just hit enter to set that name. It should change up here under clips, and then I'll hit apply to make sure I save that. Okay, so the animation is set up. I dragged it in here. You see it says Sword and Shield Idle. If I would have named it before I dragged it in, I would have gotten that name. So let's do that. Let's just delete this up by hitting the delete key. Let's go ahead and grab Sword and Shield Idle and drag it up in here, and now you see it actually picked up that name. Now the first one you drag in is going to turn orange, and that's because this is our default animation. So if I hit play now, I should see my guy doing his Sword and Shield animation. So let's check this out. Okay, and there he is. If I go in my scene view here, where I can actually kind of pivot the scene view camera around, you can see that he is moving around. He's playing that Sword and Shield Idle animation. So that's the first animation in here. That's good to go. Alright, so we've got a default animation. And what we need to do now is add in some other animations. So for instance, let's say I want this guy to be able to walk when I push a certain key. Or, well, let's look and see what animations we have. So let's look through these and find a different animation. Maybe we do one where he is doing something like, let's see, Sword and Shield slash. Let's see what this one looks like. Again, I'm going to click in on it. I'm going to go to the rig. I'm going to flip it to humanoid and hit apply. I'm then going to go into the animation, and let's just see what this looks like. I'm going to play it. That's interesting. Got a little bit of an interesting effect going on there, but it looks like he's slashing. And maybe it just wasn't done loading. Okay. And then this one I don't want to loop, so I'm going to leave loop time alone, but I got to preview it there. And let's go ahead and name it though right here, because they all come in just called Mixamo. So let's go ahead and rename this as Sword and Shield slash. Hit enter there. Hit apply to make sure that saves that change. Okay, and then let's drag this one up here into our scene as well. Alright, so here's my Sword and Shield slash. Now this will not play automatically until we tell it when to play. So on something like this, which is an attack, it's something that you want to, if you're controlling this character, you want to hit a button and have it do this animation when you're trying to attack. If it's an AI, then you want it to trigger this attack when it gets close enough to do an attack to somebody. Either way, it's a one-time, not a looping animation. So the best way usually to do one-time animations is to hook it to this any state node. So I'm going to right-click any state and make a transition. And then I'm going to click on the animation that I want it to play. Any state, when you hook things to that, that allows this animation to override whatever animation is currently playing. And then once we get to the Sword and Shield slash, once we're done with that, we want to go back to our Sword and Shield idle. So I'm going to make a transition by right-clicking and pulling this arrow out back to Sword and Shield. So I'm kind of making a pathway that shows which animations play in which order, and then I can set what are called parameters in here to control when we trigger these. So it's going to by default be playing Sword and Shield idle. I need to have a parameter here that will cause it to trigger and play this animation and then to go back to this one. So if I click on the transition arrow, I'll get some information over here. And I'll also get a little preview of what the animation will look like when it transitions. So what we need to do now is we need to set up a parameter that we can trigger this with. So I'm going to go over here to my parameters tab, and then I'm going to hit the plus sign right here to make a parameter. You have 4 to choose from. On something like this, that's going to be a button press and you want it to play an entire animation and then go back to whatever it was doing, it's best to use a trigger. So this is just like pulling a trigger. It's going to trigger off a one-time kind of event. We give it a name, so this will be called, we'll call this slash. And then we can tell it, if we click on the arrow, that we want it to go from any state to this sword slash when the condition, so we're going to hit the plus sign right here for condition, we're going to select slash. Okay, so when it gets a slash, it's going to play Sword and Shield slash. Now, after it's done playing Sword and Shield slash, we want it to go automatically to the Sword and Shield idle. So I'm going to click here on this transition. I'm going to make sure it just says exit time. And what will happen here is after it's done playing its whole entire Sword and Shield animation, it will automatically flow back down into idle. So if I was to preview this, it'll play the slash and then it'll go back to the idle. So slash and then the idle. So that's what we want it to do. So now we're all set up to trigger this animation for the Sword and Shield slash and then have it go down to its idle animation again. So now it just requires some simple code to go into this animator and tell it to pull this trigger, to set this trigger so that it will do its job. So let's make a script here. And this is actually getting to have a lot of stuff in here because I just expanded all of these animations into one thing. So why don't we make a folder inside of here? Let's create a folder. We'll call this animations. And let's grab all of these animations here and the controller too. And let's just select all those and drag them into my animations folder. That way in our asset panel here we have the animations all here. This is our Paladin's model that we brought in, so we'll leave him out here in this folder. These are the materials that go along with him, our standard assets, which is all the other things I imported, and then our terrain that I have here that gets stored in your project panel. Alright, now I've got those there. Let's make a folder here for scripts as well. And then whatever scripts we do, we can just put in this folder. Okay, in our scripts folder, let's create a C# script. We'll call this our Paladin controller script. There we go. And let's open that up in MonoDevelop. Okay, so we got our Paladin controller script here. Now the first thing we're going to need is for this script to have a link to that animator that we set up on our Paladin so it can actually set those parameters. So I'm going to make a public animator variable, and I'm just going to call it anim. And we'll assign that out in the inspector. And then what we want to do in our update is we want to check for a button to be pressed that's going to fire off that animation. So I'm just going to do an if statement. If input, I'm going to say get key down, and then I'm going to specify what key I want it to attack on. So let's do the S key for slash just for now, and we'll just see what that looks. Actually, S is used for a directional key. So let's pick a different key. Let's do X. X for slash. Now, if we get a press on the X key, then what we want to do is we want to go to our animator, which is known as anim, and then we want to set that trigger. So that was a trigger parameter, so I'm going to say set trigger, and then I just have to give that trigger's name as a string. And I think I called it slash. So now if I attach the script to my Paladin and play it and hit the X key, it should trigger that slash animation. So let's save our script. Let's go into Unity here, and let's go to our Paladin out here in the scene. Okay, on our Paladin, let's give him the Paladin script. We'll just drag and drop it over here on him. Now he needs his animator, and so we're just going to grab the animator component right here by its name and drag and drop it in. I also could have just grabbed the Paladin from the hierarchy and dragged them over here, and it would have stripped out what it wanted. We could have also done a get component in the code that would have automatically done this. But either way, it's now got the animator that has our animator controller attached to it here. So it can now set this trigger. So if I was to play now, so here's my Paladin, and if I hit the X key, he now plays his slash animation. Every time I hit X, he plays it. Now, if I was to pull my animator down here so we could see it, you can see right now, let's see if we can make that a little bigger so we can see that better. It's playing my idle animation, and if I push the X key, you'll see how it automatically goes and plays that one. So it shows you the path that your animations are taking. Okay, now another thing that we need to look at is see how I'm able to, well, there's some interesting deals going on there for he's actually coming up off the ground. We'll take care of that later. But I was able to spam that animation. That's because I was allowing it to interrupt itself. So usually when we go from any state on these, you want to go into the settings on that transition, and where it says can transition to self right here, you want to uncheck that. That'll make sure that he can't go back and play it again. So if I was to test this again, okay, he's playing his idle animation. If I hit my button here, he plays that. Now if I just keep tapping the X key, you notice that it doesn't launch another one until the first one is played. So you can't spam it like that. Okay, so that's how you can set up and model, and you can bring in animations. and you can hook it up so that you have the animations transitioning to one another. There's a lot that we can do with this. We will take a look here real quick before we end at how to go to a walking animation as well. So let's find a walking animation in my animations folder here. So let's see, Sword and Shield walk. So again, here, remember the steps. It's select the animation, make sure the rig is sent to humanoid and apply it. Then you can go into the animation tab and just check to see what the animation looks like. Now it kind of looks like he might be walking backwards in this animation. We'll have to look at that. Well, we'll try it here. And what we want to do is make sure that we name that as walk. And then we want to loop this one. And let's apply it. Alright, so we've got this walking animation applied here. Let's go ahead and drag this into our animator controller. So here's my walk animation. Okay, now again, I want it to go from my idle. This is going to be the one that I pretty much always go back to because that's my default animation. And I want to be able to go from idling to walking. So in this case, I'm going to right click idle and make a transition and drop it down to walk. And then I'm going to right click walk, make a transition, go back to idle. I'm going to need a new parameter, and when we're talking about movement, a lot of times we use the float parameter so that we can just get some values off of the inputs on our keyboard. So I'm going to hit plus sign here and get a float parameter. I'm going to call this speed. And then I'm going to click on this arrow from idle to walk. I want to make sure I uncheck has exit time, because if I don't, it will not transition to walking until it's played the whole entire idle animation cycle. So I want it to interrupt that cycle and go pretty much right away to walking. So I'll uncheck that. I'm going to add a condition here, and this time I want the speed condition I just added. Now, when he's idling, he's standing still. When he starts moving, I want him to walk. So I want it to do this when the speed parameter float value gets to be greater than a small number, like a 0.1. That means that he started to walk. And then coming back from walk to idle, it's the same idea. We want to do that based on what speed is, but this time we want to switch back when our speed is less than the 0.1, meaning that he's almost done walking and he should stop moving and start idling. So that is my setup. Again, uncheck exit time on this one because otherwise it'll wait until a whole entire walk cycle before it stops. That might look good depending on how your walk cycle is. You can experiment, but I'm turning it off for now. Alright, so that is all set up. So now all we have to do is set this speed parameter from our script based on some input. So we'll go back out to our script, and this time what we want to do is check to see if we are trying to walk. And a lot of times we use the WASD keys for walking around, and those are already set up in our input manager to an input. So I'm just going to check those, and what I'm going to do actually is just store a value for forward and backwards walking. Right now we want really just to worry about forwards. So what we're going to say here is we're going to set a float variable. We'll call this walk input, and I'm going to set this equal to input get axis, and the axis I want is called vertical. This is already set up in the input manager, and it's already mapped to the W and the S key and the up and the down arrow. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to store that frame by frame in this float. This will return a float number between a -1 and a +1 based on if I'm trying to go backwards or forwards. So this is already kind of set up for us. So I'm going to store that right here in my walk input, and then I'm going to set my animation here. So anim, and this time I'm going to set a float because that's a float parameter. I got to give it its name. It was speed, and then I'm going to put a comma and tell it what value to set it to. I'm going to feed in my walk input. Alright, walk input right here. So I capture walk input every frame and I feed that into my animator every frame so that it will know if I'm on those buttons or not for walking forward and backwards. I'm going to save this now and go back out into Unity, and we should be able to see this working. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and check this out. So let's hit play. It's playing idle here once it starts. Alright, it's playing idle, and when I push my up arrow key, oh, yep, he is walking backwards. So for some reason that's a walk backwards animation. So we're going to fix that so that we actually walk forwards instead. Since he's walking backwards, if I click on my walk and go up here, there's a speed. Now, I don't know why it's not a walk forward animation on that one, but if I put a minus sign here, I can actually make it play in reverse, and let's see if that makes me walk forward. Let's try that. And there we go. So if I just change speed to -1, it caused it to walk backwards, and then he'll just keep kind of walking off the edge of the screen because we don't have the camera following him at all. But in our scene view we can find him, and you can see that he's just kind of walking over the top of my water here now because we don't have any kind of a rigid body on him or anything like that. So, but that is getting him to walk forward. So I'll reset that so you can see it again, and maybe we'll rotate him so he walks towards the camera here a little bit. Let's rotate him around the Y here a little bit so he's facing towards us. Alright, let's hit play. Okay, and then if I hit my forward button, here he comes. He's walking towards us. When I stop, he stops and goes back to idle. So that is how you can get them to walk and stop walking. And building up your animations is just a matter of more of the same. Just adding in more clips, thinking about how it makes sense to transition between those different clips, making use of different parameters to do so. You can get pretty complicated in here. They have things called blend trees as well, which allows you to blend a bunch of different animations together. There is a lot that you can do in Unity with this. But that is enough for this video. We talked about importing a 3D model, setting its rig and its animations up, and then setting up an animation controller with parameters and setting those parameters from a script to start building up a control system. So we'll look at this a little bit more in depth later, but this gets us started. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or any comments, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll be happy to take a look at those. Have a great day.